is expanded. Visual collaboration also includes things like content and great audio, as an example. And you can see that these markets are growing pretty significantly. In fact, if you look at the web conferencing market, and this is the market that you hear vendors like GoToMeeting, as an example, right, who play very, very strongly in this market, and they're growing significantly as well. And this is also part of visual collaboration. And the point is here that this market over time is converging, and it is converging to provide us this visual experience. So this is sort of the analyst view of visual collaboration. But let's look at the workplace. And the workplace is what's rapidly changing. And I think it helps to look at a construct when we look at a workplace. And there's really three areas from the standpoint of visual collaboration we see the workplace in. The first is the concept of workforce, of course, right? A workforce, that's us, right? That's us. The most important part of the workplace is the humans, it's the people in it, it's who's working in there. And that answers who. And there's some significant changes there. I'll talk about it in a bit. The second is workspace. And this is something in the last 2 years people aren't talking about. It's where you work, right? We are working in different places. We're working in a much more open environment. We're working in mobile environments. So that's the workspace. And finally, workflow. And what workflow is it's essentially how we work, right? So now you got the who, the what, and the how. We'll go through each of these in a bit more detail. So let's start with the workforce. Now, it turns out that there are actually now in the workforce 4 generations today in the workforce. And in 2015, the most dominant generation in the workforce became the millennials. In fact, there are 91 million millennials in the workforce compared to 62 million Gen Xers. So it is in 2015, you've now got millennials dominating in the workforce. Now, what does that mean? A couple of things, right? First, and you see some of these stats here, is they're the first generation in which we call digital natives. That means that they use technology to not just to work, but to live. And they use technology as an everyday work life, and whatever that technology is, right? And it's whether it's social, whether it's some app on the phone, but that's a key component of their lives is technology. And in fact, they check, if you were all millennials, you'd have already checked by these first 5 minutes your phone probably about 10 times during this keynote. Right? And I see some of you are doing that. Stop that, right? But I will tell you that's incredible. So 37 times an hour. And 80% of them actually sleep with their device, right? In fact, there's a condition called sleep texting here among teenagers. Look it up. I'm not going to explain that to you. Not on the keynote. But it's very interesting, right? But the key here is from a collaboration standpoint is the type of work and the type of interface they use has changed. They've gone from things like remote controls, dial pads, and what you have to bring into the workforce now are things like touch and swipe and also voice processing or natural language processing. All of those things become more important as you deal with this generation in the workforce. Additionally, collaboration solutions have to span across those generations. So that's a little bit about the workforce. Now let's look at a little bit about the workspace. And I share this stat, and it's an eye chart. You don't have to read everything here, but it's an interesting stat that I just picked up last week. And as many of you know, the World Economic Forum just happened in Davos last week. And there's a great report, by the way, and it's 167 pages. It's called the World Economic Forum on the Future of Work, right? It's a fantastic document. I admit I didn't read all of it. It's 167 pages, as I said. However, one of the things that's really interesting is they asked what has fundamentally been the biggest drivers in socioeconomic change. And if you look at this chart, it talks about very big things like climate change, rise of the middle class in emerging markets, all things that are happening. But the number one thing that was cited was the changing work environment and how technology has enabled us to work in different places, and essentially different places to provide value to an overall corporation. So pretty significant. So essentially, the World Economic Forum is saying that workspaces have become one of the biggest drivers in change in the workforce and in the workplace. So now let's bring that home a little bit. Let's bring that to the things that you and I care about, that you and I support from some of the small enterprises and the large enterprises. And when you look at workspaces, we wanted to put some more definition on these workspaces. And there's a great paper by Knoll Research, right? Again, another really good piece of research that actually put and defined these spaces. And they defined 8 spaces, as you can see on this slide, right? And all the way from personal spaces. These are spaces that, it could be in a Starbucks, where you're on the road, you could be at home, you could be anywhere, but it's a personal space. Then they divided the other spaces into smaller spaces, which they call the huddle room, and then the group spaces, which are the larger rooms, the larger video conferencing rooms that you've seen. And what you see, there's several interesting characteristics and stats about these different spaces. First, that they find that in these different spaces, we essentially spend about 75% of our time in some sort of corporate office, whether it's headquarters or satellite rooms. But 25% is spent on either at home or what they call a third space. So for many of you who consult with clients, your client space would be considered a third space. So that's sort of where we spend our time. And they also found that the square foot per employee for personal space has gone down in the last 15 years. So in other words, as you get fewer and fewer desks, so you have the desk sharing and the hot desking, all of that has contributed to smaller and smaller personal space. However, the square footage per person for meeting space has gone up. In other words, there are more and more people collaborating to get their job done. So how do you address that? So let's talk about a couple of solutions, and I have to say, as Rick said, I am a product guy, right? So I do have to share a couple of products with you. And one of the things that we set out to do as Polycom Stanley is attack this huddle space. And this huddle space, if you cite some research, actually Wayne House Research, who's here by the way on my right, and they said there's about 50 million of these spaces across the world. 50 million, right? Now, if you really look at it, when you look at that 50 million, turns out that only 4% are populated with any sort of rich visual collaboration or video conferencing. Only 4% of those spaces are populated with that. So that's a huge opportunity. And there's several barriers that prevented in the past addressing the other space. So we set out to go after the huddle room. So one of the things we did was come out with a next generation conference phone. So everyone's seen this. Probably many of you have seen the iconic three-legged conference phone that you use for audio. You've used it. You've seen it on. It's even in TV shows nowadays, right? So it's pretty iconic. And this turns out that the conference phone actually is in about 14% of these spaces across the world. So over triple the amount of video conferencing. So we took this conference phone and we made the next generation conference phone. We did all the basics, right? We made great audio. We built great audio and all those capabilities. And we said, well, hang on a sec. If they're in 14%, can we turn this device to provide visual collaboration as well? And in fact, indeed we did. We were able to turn that conference phone into what we call the first smart hub, world's first smart hub. So we used the concept, and if any of you have used Sonos, have you heard of Sonos, right? The music system, right? And what Sonos does is it does some very good device-to-device connectivity. It enables you to discover other devices. So it's machine-to-machine type language, that Internet of Things and whatever buzzword you want to use, right, around it. But essentially, what we did with this is we said, okay, well, we have a console here, which is this conference phone. We actually attached another device that you could attach on the back of your screen that automatically communicates with this console and then provides both video and audio capabilities. And turns out that becomes a great tool, a great solution for a huddle room. Why? Because most huddle rooms have a screen and really nothing else, maybe a phone and a screen. And so what ends up happening is that people want to go into these huddle rooms and present. You know, you want to show some material, you may want to communicate, but now we can turn this into a full-fledged collaboration, sharing content, and a full-fledged video experience. And we feel by doing this, you can start to now address that other 40 million plus rooms that have not been populated with visual collaboration. And early, this just got released in November, I can tell you that this has been very popular for us. The early indications from early sales, about 50% of the orders are full collaboration kit. You can order it as just a conference phone or a complete collaboration kit. About half of that has been collaboration kit, and it's clearly something that is that's popular. So that's proliferating, right? That's getting video and visual collaboration out. But what about creating different experiences in the workspace? And so one of the things that we noticed, and clearly wasn't me, but we have a CTO group and a human factors group, and we did a lot of study with several companies, several large companies, probably about 60 Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And one of the things we noticed is that we tend to collaborate naturally in the round. I mean, look at the tables you're on. You're on a round table. We collaborate in a round table. That's what we do. We've done it for years, right? We've done it around campfires. We do it around the dinner table. Yet when you get into things like video conferencing, we force you to look at the wall and not other people. So the concept here was, how can we give you that rich collaboration but put people in the center of the conversation? I mean, many of you have probably been in a group video conferencing session where you're focused on each other, and unless the person on the wall has a very strong personality or you explicitly call them out, they get ignored, right? How many times has that happened? Well, probably a lot, right? So the idea here is, how do you bring everybody into the mix? Now, it turns out, now this is a concept we've had for about 7 years. The technology for this didn't really exist to make it happen, because there's a lot of technology involved in this, right? The ability to do touch, as an example. The ability to have 360-degree camera, and you've got to get the stitching right, 1080p stitching right. And I don't want to get into all the technical details, but there's a lot of technology behind this. And then it's important that you put a set of production rules, because what happens when I sit, but then I want to be able to naturally stand and whiteboard things, and I have to have the camera follow me and my content, right? Or if I'm in listening mode, I sit down and I'm listening, I want to be able to see the entire panel, everybody in the room. I want the remote side to be able to see that. So we put a